Do you remember those forgotten 10-minute sandwiches that made busy days easier and stretched every dollar when it counted? Hard to believe something so simple could just disappear, isn't it? Peanut butter and pickle sandwiches might sound like an accident today, but back then, this was a lunchbox staple you would actually get excited about. The briny snap of pickles with that sticky peanut butter was a salty-sweet combo that just worked. A lot of kids brought these to school in the 1960s and 1970s, and nobody blinked twice. Old Depression-era cookbooks and church recipe cards treated this like a 5-minute solution for a tight budget. You could make one with dill pickles, bread and butter pickles, or whatever you had on hand. It was fast, cheap, and weirdly satisfying. The crunch of the pickles broke through the heaviness of the peanut butter, which made it feel less like a survival sandwich and more like something you would actually want. This was not a gourmet meal. This was a sandwich you slapped together between chores, work shifts, or school runs. It had enough protein to keep you going and enough flavor to keep you from complaining. Funny how something that simple just disappeared from most lunchboxes. Pineapple and cream cheese sandwiches were a sweet and savory fix that showed up everywhere from church potlucks to fancy ladies' lunch cookbooks in the 1960s. It was one of those easy sandwiches you could pull together in minutes, but it looked like you put in real effort. All you needed was soft white bread, a quick smear of cream cheese, and a ring of canned pineapple. Some people would chop the pineapple to make it easier to bite into, while others went bold with a whole slice. It was not about being filling. It was about that contrast between tangy and sweet. You might see it topped with a maraschino cherry if you were really showing off. Pineapple was cheap and popular thanks to the rise of canned fruit, and cream cheese was starting to show up more in everyday American homes. This sandwich was less about nutrition and more about offering something light, fun, and easy. It fit right into the rhythm of social events where nobody wanted to spend hours cooking, but everyone wanted the food to feel a little special. Olive and nut sandwich spread was the kind of thing you would find in vintage garden party menus or tucked into the pages of old luncheon cookbooks from the 1940s and 1950s. It was a make-ahead sandwich filler that used basic pantry staples: green olives, peanuts, and mayonnaise. You would chop the olives, crush the nuts, stir in the mayo, and spread it thick between soft slices of white or wheat bread. It was not a sandwich for kids. It had that salty, tangy bite that adults loved, especially at book clubs and summer gatherings. It was something you could make in 10 minutes and serve at a table that looked a lot fancier than the actual effort behind it. Sometimes people swapped in pecans or walnuts if that is what they had. This sandwich was a quiet star at church picnics and was often served in neat, crustless triangles to make it feel a little more formal. It is funny how fast it disappeared once tastes changed, because back then, this was a go-to for quick, savory bites. Cheese and ketchup toast sandwiches were not trying to be fancy, and they did not have to be. In the 1970s, this was one of the easiest hot sandwiches you could make, especially for kids coming home from school. All you needed was white sandwich bread, a slice of American cheese, and a quick smear of ketchup. You would toast the sandwich until the cheese melted and the ketchup warmed up into something sweet and savory. The ketchup was a stand-in for tomato sauce, but nobody really thought about it that way. It was just what you had. This was not a weekend dinner or a picnic meal. It was a fast fix when the fridge was mostly empty. It is one of those sandwiches that was not written down in big cookbooks but passed around in everyday life. Moms made them, kids loved them, and they were ready in 10 minutes or less. Today, you barely hear about it, but it was a little comfort bite that filled a plate when times were tight. Mashed potato and onion sandwiches were a rural kitchen fix that quietly showed up in farmhouses and small-town homes when leftovers needed a purpose. You would slap some leftover mashed potatoes onto white bread, add a few slices of sharp raw onion, and call it a day. This sandwich was born out of frugality, but that does not mean it was joyless. The softness of the potatoes balanced the bite of the onions, and sometimes people would sprinkle on salt and pepper or spread a thin layer of butter if they could spare it. It was fast, it was filling, and it was dirt cheap. The potato sandwich was a go-to when meat was scarce or the grocery budget had already run out. It did not make it into glossy magazines or fancy lunch spreads, but it showed up on workbenches and picnic tables when people needed something that just did the job. Funny how something so ordinary can vanish so completely from today's lunchboxes. Spam and pineapple sandwiches were a little slice of post-war tropical dreams, fast, salty, and just sweet enough to stand out. Spam was already a household name by the 1950s, and canned pineapple was riding its own wave of popularity. Together, they made a 10-minute sandwich that felt like a small escape. You would pan-fry slices of Spam until they crisped up, slap them on white bread, and top them with a juicy pineapple ring straight from the can. Some people toasted the bread, some added a slice of cheese, and some threw on a splash of mustard or mayo. It was all about using what you had. This sandwich was the kind of thing you made when you needed something quick that still felt a little exciting. It fit right into the post-war love for Hawaiian-inspired flavors, even if it was not exactly the real deal. It vanished from most tables once Spam lost its everyday crown, but back then, this was fast food done right at home. Apple and sharp cheddar sandwiches were the back-to-school answer to the peanut butter routine in the 1970s. Parents and cookbook writers called them healthy, but let us be honest, they mostly showed up because they were fast and just different enough to keep kids interested. You would slice crisp apples, pile them onto whole wheat bread, and add sharp cheddar cheese. Some people drizzled honey on top, others kept it plain, but the crunch of the apple and the salty bite of the cheddar worked together perfectly. This was not a lunchbox filler you saw at every table, but the kids who had it definitely remember it. It came from a time when people were just starting to think about balanced lunches in a more serious way, but they still wanted easy, fast, and cheap. This sandwich was the kind of recipe you would find in school newsletters, parent magazines, or those slim back-to-school cookbooks that promised to make lunch packing easier. It was a small, quick win in a hectic morning. Peanut butter and marshmallow cream sandwiches, also called fluffernutters, were sticky, sweet, and proudly part of mid-century childhoods. This sandwich was one of those 10-minute fixes that tasted like dessert, but somehow passed as lunch. You would spread thick peanut butter on one slice of white bread and a gooey layer of marshmallow cream on the other. Smash them together, and you had a lunchbox treat that dripped down your hands and made you feel like you were getting away with something. It was a common sight in New England, but popped up in lunchboxes all over America during the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. It was not health food, but that was not the point. It was about fast, cheap happiness. It mostly disappeared outside of a few loyal corners of the country, but back then, it was a king among after-school snacks. Parents loved how easy it was to make, and kids loved how sweet it was. Egg salad with sweet pickle relish was not the plain egg salad you see today. It was bright yellow, a little too sweet, and pulled straight from the pages of vintage picnic guides. You would mash up hard-boiled eggs, stir in a generous dollop of mayo, a squirt of mustard, and a big spoonful of sweet pickle relish. Some families tossed in a splash of vinegar or a pinch of sugar to boost the sweetness even more. This was not a sandwich about balance. It leaned all the way into tangy and sweet. It was fast to make, easy to spread, and packed into picnic baskets and lunch boxes all across the 1960s and 1970s. The egg salad sandwich was a workhorse at neighborhood cookouts and summer gatherings. You would see stacks of them cut into neat halves or wrapped in wax paper, ready to grab and go. Somewhere along the way, the sweet version fell out of style, but back then, it was the sandwich you could count on. Cucumber and mint cream cheese tea sandwiches were the quick, elegant little bites that ruled over 1960s party menus. They looked fancy but came together in under 10 minutes, which is probably why they showed up at so many last-minute gatherings. You would spread soft cream cheese onto thin white bread, layer on crisp cucumber slices, and sprinkle in fresh mint. Some folks added a pinch of salt or a dash of lemon juice, but most kept it simple. You would trim the crusts to make perfect little rectangles or triangles, stacking them on serving trays like they were something out of a magazine. These sandwiches were popular at baby showers, tea parties, and church events where everything needed to look neat but be quick to prepare. They were light, refreshing, and just formal enough to feel special. Somewhere along the way, they slipped off everyday menus, but back then, they were a quick ticket to a pretty plate. Peanut butter and bacon sandwich is one of those salty-sweet combinations that you might wrinkle your nose at now, but for decades, it was tucked away in old military meal guides and lunchbox manuals as an energy-packed fix that got people through rough days. Think about it. Peanut butter was already the go-to protein when you needed something cheap, shelf-stable, and filling. Bacon? Well, when you had it, you stretched it as far as possible, and a few crisp slices between soft white bread with peanut butter made for a sandwich that was quick, satisfying, and weirdly comforting. Soldiers carried versions of this during World War II, and by the time the 1950s and 1960s rolled around, parents were packing it in lunchboxes for kids who needed to stay full all afternoon. It sounds indulgent now, but this was practicality wrapped in bread. A quick 10-minute sandwich that gave you protein, salt, and fat all in one bite. You will find this recipe buried in old wartime cooking guides, community cookbooks, and handwritten notes that got passed down through families. Bologna and grape jelly sandwich might sound like a dare today, but back in the 1960s and 1970s, it was a real lunchbox staple that actually made the rounds in community cookbooks and kids' recipe sections. Bologna was everywhere during those decades, cheap, salty, and easy to slap onto bread. But plain bologna gets boring fast, so some genius or desperate parent decided to pair it with grape jelly, and somehow it's stuck. You got that salty, savory slice of lunch meat balanced out by the sticky sweetness of jelly, all held together by plain white sandwich bread. It took less than 10 minutes to make, cost almost nothing, and filled bellies when fancier options were not available. Neighborhood potlucks, school cafeterias, even quick roadside lunches saw this oddball sandwich show up, usually raising eyebrows but winning over plenty of folks in the process. It is the kind of recipe that never officially disappeared. It just quietly slipped out of fashion when people stopped experimenting with weird pantry pairings. Date and walnut cream cheese sandwich showed up everywhere, from mid-century holiday recipe booklets to last-minute fancy party food sections, offering a fast, sweet option for when guests popped by unannounced. You did not need much, just soft cream cheese, chopped dates, a handful of walnuts, and bread. Spread the cream cheese, sprinkle the chopped dates and walnuts over the top, and you had yourself a 10-minute sandwich that felt just a little bit upscale, even if your pantry was running low. These sandwiches were big hits at holiday parties, bridal showers, and garden club meetings, often cut into small triangles or finger-friendly portions with the crusts trimmed off. It was a sweet, nutty, creamy bite that people swore made them feel like better hosts, even when the meal budget was running thin. Old cookbook pamphlets from the 1940s through the 1970s often listed this one under quick finger food or unexpected guests because it was easy, affordable, and polished enough to serve without fuss. Cottage cheese and chives on rye was once the poster child for healthy eating in women's health cookbooks from the 1950s and 1960s. Back then, cottage cheese was everywhere. It was cheap, packed with protein, and low in fat before calorie counting became a national obsession. Rye bread gave it that earthy, wholesome vibe, and a sprinkle of chopped chives made you feel like you had crafted something fresh, even though the whole sandwich came together in under 10 minutes. Homemaker magazines, diet pamphlets, and even workplace lunch guides pushed this one as a light, nutritious option when you needed to stay full without tipping the scale. You could find versions of it at ladies' luncheons, tucked inside brown paper bags, or even served on cocktail trays at fancier gatherings where calorie-conscious eating was quietly encouraged. It may have vanished from modern menus, but for years, this sandwich was the go-to when you needed something quick, tidy, and respectable in front of guests. Deviled ham sandwich. Spread might not sound glamorous, but in the world of fast, frugal lunches from the 1940s to the 1970s, it was a pantry hero. The deviled ham came right out of a little can, usually that familiar red-labeled variety, and when you mixed it with mayo and mustard, you got an instant sandwich filling that felt fancier than plain lunch meat, but took barely 5 minutes to whip up. Spread it on soft bread, maybe toss in some lettuce if you had it, and you had a salty, tangy, rich sandwich that filled the gap between meals without much effort. This was the kind of recipe that lived in the fast lunch sections of old cookbooks and kept showing up on factory lunch breaks, in school lunchboxes, or at neighborhood picnics when the grocery budget was wearing thin. It was practical, shelf-stable, and turned what looked like plain pantry staples into a meal that stuck with you. You did not need deli counters or fancy ingredients, just a can, some bread, and a little creativity. Cold meatloaf sandwich with yellow mustard was blue-collar comfort food at its most practical. You baked the meatloaf for dinner, then sliced it cold the next day, slapped it between two pieces of plain bread, added a swipe of sharp yellow mustard, and there you had it. A filling, no-fuss sandwich ready in minutes. It showed up everywhere from factory lunchrooms to kitchen tables, a fast way to stretch yesterday's dinner into today's meal without breaking the bank. Meatloaf was already a budget staple, often stretched with breadcrumbs, oats, or leftover veggies, so repurposing it into sandwiches was just another way families made every bite count. You would spot these sandwiches wrapped in wax paper inside lunch pails, tucked into brown bags, or stacked on picnic tables with potato chips and sweet tea. It was not glamorous, but it was dependable. A straightforward, hearty sandwich that filled bellies during long workdays. You can still find versions of this in vintage, leftover makeover cookbooks from the 1940s to the 1970s. Chili sauce and cheese sandwich was one of those quirky shortcuts that people pulled straight from the fridge, combining a little spice with just enough comfort to feel satisfying. Sliced cheddar cheese, usually sharp for maximum flavor, met a dollop of bottled chili sauce. Yes, the same kind hiding in the condiment door of the refrigerator. And it all got slapped between two slices of bread. It took under 10 minutes to make, cost almost nothing, and carried just enough kick to wake up your taste buds. Kraft advertisements from the 1950s and 1960s loved showing this one off as an easy lunch idea for busy homemakers, always promising bold flavor without bold effort. Sometimes folks toasted the bread for a little extra crunch, but most of the time it stayed soft, making it a quick portable meal for lunchboxes, work breaks, or backyard picnics. It never made the cover of fancy cookbooks, but in old community recipe books and vintage ads, this oddball sandwich quietly held its own as a reliable, tangy fix for hunger pangs. Avocado and cottage cheese sandwich was considered downright modern when it started popping up in California cookbooks during the 1970s health craze. Back then, people were beginning to swap heavy meats for lighter options, and avocados were finally shedding their reputation as an exotic oddity to become a West Coast staple. Cottage cheese was already a go-to for calorie counters, and pairing it with avocado on whole wheat or rye bread became a quick, nutritious lunch you could pull together in under 10 minutes. It was smooth, creamy, and surprisingly filling, showing up at health food cafes, beachside picnics, and inside brown bags packed by parents trying to ride the clean-eating trend. Old recipe booklets from health clubs and women's magazines swore by this sandwich as a smarter, fresher alternative to Bologna or ham. You might laugh at it now, but in its heyday, it was proof that even forgotten sandwiches could feel trendy and ahead of their time. Funny how avocado toast gets all the attention today when avocado sandwiches were already making waves 50 years ago. Hard-boiled egg and lettuce on buttered bread might sound plain, but in mid-century homemaker guides, it was the gold standard for fast, no-fuss sandwiches. You boiled the eggs ahead of time, sliced them thin, added crisp lettuce, and layered it all on soft bread with a swipe of salted butter. It took under 10 minutes, filled you up, and managed to feel a little polished, especially compared to the usual peanut butter or cold cuts. You would find this sandwich tucked inside lunchboxes, served at small gatherings, or packed for road trips when the family hit the highway. It popped up again and again in quick meal sections of cookbooks from the 1940s to the 1970s, praised for being affordable, easy to prep, and light enough to avoid that heavy after-lunch slump. Some folks added salt and pepper or a touch of mustard, but the bare-bones version stayed a favorite for decades. It is the kind of sandwich that feels basic now, but back then, it carried families through busy days with minimal effort and maximum practicality. Crushed potato chips and mayonnaise sandwich might sound like something a desperate kid invented after raiding the pantry. But believe it or not, This crunchy, salty creation earned its spot in old-school lunchboxes and late-night snack routines. You took plain sandwich bread, slathered it with mayonnaise, and piled on a handful of crushed potato chips before pressing the second slice on top. That was it. Fast, cheap, and somehow satisfying when the grocery shelves looked bare. It was especially popular in working-class households during the 1960s and 1970s, a sneaky way to stretch lunch or whip up a midnight bite without cooking. Some folks swapped the mayo for mustard or added a slice of cheese if they had extra in the fridge, but the classic version kept it simple. Bread, mayo, chips, done. Old cookbooks rarely listed this officially, but ask around, and plenty of people have stories about sneaking this sandwich when the cupboards were nearly empty. Cheese and pineapple chunks sandwich was one of those tropical-inspired recipes that made its way into every mid-century cookbook trying to convince folks they were on vacation, even if they were just standing in their kitchen with canned goods. Cubed pineapple, shredded cheddar cheese, and a dollop of mayonnaise got tossed together and slapped onto soft white bread for a sweet, tangy, salty sandwich that came together in minutes. It sounds a little wild now, but back then, anything with pineapple felt exotic. You would find versions of this recipe hiding in those old spiral-bound community cookbooks, especially ones from the 1950s and 1960s when tiki parties and tropical themes were all the rage. People served this sandwich at luncheons, packed it for road trips, and proudly brought it to potlucks like it was some culinary passport to Hawaii. The pineapple's sweetness played off the sharpness of cheddar, and the mayo tied it all together in a creamy, rich bite. Sure, it might not win over picky eaters today, but for families on a budget looking to dress up pantry staples, this forgotten sandwich brought just enough flair to the table. Ham salad with green pepper spread was a lunch staple that Southern kitchens swore by, showing up in hand-me-down recipe cards, church cookbooks, and small-town sandwich shops throughout the 1940s to the 1970s. You started with minced leftover ham, sometimes straight from the Sunday roast, sometimes canned, and mixed it with diced green peppers, a little mayo, and whatever seasonings you had on hand. Spread that onto white bread or saltine crackers, and lunch was ready in under 10 minutes. The green pepper added a little crunch and brightness, balancing out the rich, salty ham in a way that made the whole sandwich feel fresh, even if you were working with leftovers. You would find this sandwich wrapped in wax paper on factory lunch breaks, packed for picnics, or served cold on hot summer days when no one wanted to turn on the stove. It was filling, practical, and easy to whip up with pantry and fridge scraps. Over time, fancier sandwich spreads took over, but for generations of families, this frugal little recipe was a go-to. Funny how simple fixes like this once carried whole mealtimes, only to quietly disappear. Mashed banana and mayonnaise sandwich was one of those strange Southern classics that sneaked into national cookbooks, school lunch menus, and busy morning routines from the 1930s through the 1970s. Bananas were cheap, mayonnaise stayed in the fridge, and soft sandwich bread brought it all together fast. You mashed the banana, spread it on bread, added a swipe of mayo, and that was it. Sweet, creamy, tangy, and surprisingly filling when grocery budgets ran tight. Some folks added sugar, others bacon if they had it, but the banana and mayo version kept things easy. It never made the cover of glossy magazines, but behind the scenes, this sandwich quietly filled bellies, lunch boxes, and long afternoons. Today, it feels like one of those oddities people raise eyebrows at, but for anyone who grew up with it, one bite brings back simpler, scrappier times. Cold-baked bean sandwich might sound like a stretch now, but in the 1960s and 1970s, waste-not cooking guides swore by this frugal fix for using every last spoonful of last night's dinner. Leftover baked beans mashed onto soft bread, sometimes with mustard or butter, and suddenly you had a protein-packed sandwich in 5 minutes. It was not glamorous, but it worked when meat was scarce or you just needed to stretch leftovers. Old cookbooks listed this under quick lunches, often suggesting it for factory workers or school kids. The beans stayed sweet, smoky, and hearty, making it surprisingly satisfying even cold. You would spot these wrapped in wax paper or pulled out on road trips when rest stops were few and far between. It may not be the prettiest sandwich, but it filled stomachs and stretched budgets. which mattered back then. Funny how meals born from scraps often stick with us longest. Tomato and sugar sandwich was one of those summer bites farmers and small-town families swore by when gardens were overflowing and dessert options were slim. You sliced ripe tomatoes, sprinkled them with sugar, and tucked them between soft bread for a juicy, sweet, slightly messy sandwich. It sounds strange today, but in rural cookbooks from the 1940s through the 1970s, this was practically a seasonal tradition. Garden-grown tomatoes were a point of pride, and sugar turned an ordinary sandwich into a refreshing treat. You would see these packed into picnic baskets, served as afternoon snacks, or made for farm kids heading back into fields. Some folks added butter to the bread, others swore by plain, but the sweet tomato combination stayed simple and satisfying. It is one of those recipes you rarely hear about now, but for families close to the land, it was proof that even garden basics could feel special with sugar. Funny how food traditions often start right outside your door. Radish and butter sandwich on salted white bread was a humble little snack with deep roots in peasant cooking traditions, showing up in early 1900s cookbooks and sticking around well into mid-century lunches. You took soft bread, spread on salted butter, layered sliced radishes, and added a pinch of salt if you wanted to feel fancy. It sounds simple, but for families stretching tight budgets or pulling from gardens, this sandwich hit the marks: quick, cheap, crisp, satisfying. It carried over from European traditions where radishes were a staple crop and butter was a treat. Homemaker guides listed this as a 10-minute fix or garden snack that needed no cooking. You would spot these packed in lunch pails, served at garden parties, or laid on picnic tables next to lemonade. The radish added bite, the butter kept it creamy, and the sandwich delivered salty crunch. These days, it feels like a relic, but back then, it quietly filled tables with minimal effort. Funny how the simplest meals leave the deepest imprint. Peanut butter and lettuce sandwich might sound like a dare today, but decades ago, it was a surprisingly common fix for families who wanted to stretch staples while keeping things crisp and filling. You spread a thin layer of peanut butter on bread, added crisp lettuce, and that was it. A quick, protein-packed sandwich ready fast. It showed up in community cookbooks, especially in the 1950s and 1960s, often recommended as a healthy lunchbox option for kids. The peanut butter added staying power, the lettuce gave it crunch, and the whole thing stayed light enough for hot days when heavy meals felt impossible. Some folks added mayo, others skipped it, but the bare-bones version kept costs low and bellies full. You would find this sandwich packed for school, laid out at picnics, or eaten from the kitchen counter on rushed mornings. It never reached the fame of peanut butter and jelly, but for generations it was just another way to make do with pantry basics. Funny how forgotten sandwiches sound strange until you remember how well they worked. Shredded carrot and raisin sandwiches were one of those health-focused lunchbox fixes that filled up 1970s school guides, blending sweetness, crunch, and just enough fiber to keep kids full through recess. You grated carrots, tossed in raisins, mixed it with mayo or cream cheese, and spread it on soft sandwich bread. It was quick, easy, and checked all the boxes for parents sneaking vegetables into lunch. The carrots gave it crunch, the raisins added sweetness, and the creamy spread pulled it all together. You would spot these in brown paper bags, school cafeterias, and picnic blankets when families packed a fast lunch. Health magazines and cookbooks called this a smart growing snack, often pairing it with apple slices or milk. It sounds old-fashioned now, but for families navigating food costs and nutrition fads, this forgotten sandwich hit the mark. Funny how shortcuts for healthy meals end up forgotten as trends change. Leftover sloppy Joe cold sandwiches probably would not win a beauty contest, but for families on a budget, this messy next-day fix was hiding in retro lunchboxes and old-school meal guides. You scooped cold, sloppy Joe meat onto plain bread, slapped on the second slice, and lunch was ready in minutes. The saucy, seasoned meat soaked into the bread, making it surprisingly satisfying even cold. It popped up in cookbooks, factory lunchrooms, and school cafeterias as a budget-friendly way to stretch dinner into tomorrow's lunch. Some folks wrapped them in wax paper to take on the go. Others added cheese or pickles. But the idea stayed the same. Waste nothing, stretch everything. It might sound odd today, but for families juggling tight food budgets, these cold, sloppy Joe sandwiches were practical, filling, and surprisingly tasty. Funny how some meals stick around because they get the job done. Pimento cheese with crushed pineapple sandwiches were a quirky, fruit-infused twist on the beloved Southern staple, popping up in old cookbooks, picnic baskets, and roadside diners from the 1950s to the 1970s. You mixed cheddar, mayo, pimentos, and crushed pineapple into a creamy spread, slathered it onto bread, and had a fast, flavorful sandwich ready in minutes. The pineapple gave it sweetness, the cheese kept it rich, and the pimentos brought tang to balance it out. It was popular at church luncheons, backyard gatherings, or any place that needed a quick, crowd-pleasing bite. You would spot this sandwich next to deviled eggs, potato salad, and pitchers of sweet tea, all part of the retro lunch spread. Over time, the classic pimento cheese sandwich stayed famous, but the pineapple version faded from menus and recipe cards. It might sound unusual now, but back then, it was the perfect mix of sweet, salty, and creamy comfort. Simple, quick, and impossible to forget once you tried it. Funny how some flavor combos never make it to the next generation. Turkey and cranberry pemmican sandwiches were the original trail mix meets Thanksgiving dinner. Dried shreds of wild turkey were pounded with rendered fat and tart cranberries, then pressed into dense cakes or layered inside split cornbread pouches. This was not a meal made for pleasure, it was made for endurance. But somehow, the sweet-savory combination felt familiar, even warm. Carried during northeastern winters, this portable power food was eaten during hunts, travels, or times when game was scarce and the snow ran deep. Sometimes additional nuts or seeds were mixed in, and when cornbread was on hand, it became a sandwich, dense, chewy, and surprisingly rich. It didn't need refrigeration, it didn't spoil quickly, and it held the memory of autumn feasts long after the season had passed. Today, pemmican is known mostly among survivalists and historians, but this specific turkey and cranberry version was once common in the colder woodland regions. It's strange to think a meal this ancient tastes so much like the holidays, but maybe that's the point. It held on to warmth when everything else had frozen. The chow mein sandwich was chaos held together by two buns, and somehow it worked. Born in southeastern Massachusetts, this Frankenstein creation placed a mound of crispy chow mein noodles smothered in thick brown gravy between two hamburger buns. The result was a crunchy, savory, totally illogical meal that became a school lunch staple in some corners of the country. Kids would unwrap their foil-wrapped mystery and find a puddle of sauce and starch that somehow filled every craving and left fingers coated in grease. This was the kind of sandwich you could not eat neatly, and that was half the fun. The noodles poked out the sides, the sauce soaked into the bread, and no two bites were ever the same. The chow mein sandwich was a lunchtime dare wrapped in cultural mashup, a reminder that not all great foods make perfect sense on paper. Over time, regional oddities like this one gave way to standardization. One bite, and you were somewhere between comfort food and total confusion, and somehow that felt exactly right. The hot brown was what you made when you had leftovers and a little bit of pride. Open-faced, built on a thick slice of toast, then loaded with turkey and bacon. But what made it special was the Mornay sauce, a rich, cheesy bechamel poured over the top and broiled until it bubbled and browned. It came out of Louisville, Kentucky from the Brown Hotel, but it made its way to family tables when there was turkey to use up and dads wanted something more than a cold sandwich. It was warm. It was indulgent. And it felt like dinner, even if it was built from scraps. Some versions added tomato slices, some skipped the broiler. But the essence stayed. Meat, cheese, bread, and heat. Working men who came home hungry could make one in 10 minutes. It was not pretty. It did not stack well. But it hit the spot and filled the plate. Sometimes that was all you asked of a meal. Juniper smoked trout with corn husk wraps was a mountain meal you could smell before you could see. The trout, cleaned and lightly brined, was smoked over green juniper wood until its skin crinkled and the flesh turned a warm, golden hue. Then it was laid inside softened corn husks, sometimes with a few foraged greens or slivers of root vegetables. The husks were tied like little packages and either steamed or left as is, depending on the region. Eaten hot, they melted in your mouth. Eaten cold, they still tasted like the fire. The juniper gave it an aromatic, almost piney undertone, and the whole thing could be carried without refrigeration for days. This wasn't a sandwich in the modern sense, but it had all the makings of one: protein, starch, portability, and tradition. But this humble parcel once fed travelers, traders, and shepherds on high cliffs and quiet lakes. Egg salad sandwiches were messy, mushy, and magical in the way only school lunch legends can be. Made from chopped hard-boiled eggs, mayonnaise, and a touch of mustard or seasoning, egg salad was the sandwich that smelled strong and stuck with you, literally and figuratively. It was packed between slices of soft bread and often left a faint imprint on the bag it came in. And yet, it was beloved. There was something comforting about it, something that felt homemade and humble. It was a meal you could trust. Some versions had bits of celery or onion, others kept it basic. But every egg salad sandwich came with a promise. You were going to be full, and you were going to remember it. Kids either cherished it or turned up their noses. There was no in-between. But for those who loved it, egg salad was the crown jewel of the lunchbox. Today, it is often replaced by cleaner, quieter options, tucked away in prepackaged containers at the back of the deli case. The egg salad sandwich is creamy, comforting, and unmistakably retro. Made from chopped hard-boiled eggs mixed with mayonnaise, mustard, maybe a dash of paprika or chopped celery, it's been a lunchtime standby for decades. Spread thickly onto white or wheat bread, it's soft enough to squish between your fingers but rich enough to feel like a meal. Grandmas packed them for road trips, office workers brought them in wax paper, and diners offered them as a cooling option on hot days. It wasn't fancy, but it was familiar, a quiet kind of indulgence. Every family had their own version, some chunkier, some smoother, some with green olives or scallions, others strictly plain. There's something nostalgic about the way it smells when you unwrap it, and the way the bread sticks just a little to the roof of your mouth. The egg salad sandwich never tried to compete with cold cuts. It just showed up, creamy and loyal, ready to carry you through till dinner. Liverwurst sandwiches were bold. You knew it the moment someone unwrapped one across the table. That unmistakable scent, rich and meaty, mixed with sharp mustard or sliced onions, hit like a wave. The sandwich itself was unapologetically old school, usually served on rye or pumpernickel bread, often from a family who still shopped at the neighborhood butcher. Liverwurst was spreadable sausage, soft but full of iron and flavor, and it had no intention of going unnoticed. It was the sandwich your grandpa swore by, the one your parents either embraced or exiled. And for kids, it was a gamble, either a lunchroom legend or a quick trade for something with peanut butter. But for those who loved it, liverwurst was gold. It was hearty. It was grown up. It was tradition sliced thick and pressed between slices of something dark and sturdy. Liverwurst never begged for your approval. It knew it was not for everyone. Today, you hardly see it outside specialty stores and deli counters. But for a time, it was part of the rotation. Loved by few, remembered by all. Hazelnut and wild onion spread sandwiches were the definition of less is more. Made by grinding roasted hazelnuts into a creamy paste and folding in finely chopped wild onions, the mixture was then spread onto thin, grainy flatbreads. Sometimes the flatbread was made from acorn or chestnut flour. Other times it was just coarse ground maize. The result was earthy, pungent, and filling. This was a forager's lunch, light to carry, dense with nutrients, and quick to prepare. You could eat it cold or warm it slightly over stones. Some versions were spiced with foraged herbs or ramp bulbs. Today, hazelnut paste is something you find in chocolates and spreads, but in the old days, it was protein fuel from the forest floor. The onions? Pulled straight from the soil, not shipped in from a warehouse. The fish stick sandwich was a miracle of convenience. Frozen breaded rectangles of fish, crisped in the oven and stacked onto sandwich bread with a squeeze of tartar sauce or even ketchup. It was a staple of elementary school lunches and tired weeknights, usually accompanied by applesauce or peas that rolled around the plate. Kids loved it because it was mild and crunchy, and parents loved it because it was quick. Most fish stick sandwiches weren't trying to win awards. They were trying to make everyone stop complaining. Some households elevated them with cheese, lettuce, or soft hoagie rolls, but others stayed true to the basics: white bread, fish sticks, and whatever sauce was nearby. This sandwich was often the first introduction to seafood for picky eaters, cloaked in crunch and comfort. There was something weirdly satisfying about lining up the fish sticks like puzzle pieces, making sure every bite had one. It wasn't gourmet, but it got us through. Buffalo heart sandwiches on stone bread were once reserved for warriors and hunters. Thin slices of buffalo heart grilled directly over open flame, then served on thick, chewy rounds of unleavened bread cooked on hot stones. This wasn't just food, it was fuel. Dense with iron and flavor, the heart meat had a gamey bite softened only slightly by the bread's smoky crust. It was eaten with bare hands, no utensils, no ceremony, just fire and hunger. Some added wild herbs, others nothing at all. It was a meal designed to travel, to sustain through hard rides or long scouts across open plains. The bread, dense and flat, could last for days. The heart, once cooked, was chewy but nourishing. In colder months, the sandwich would be wrapped in hide and tucked into a satchel, staying warm for hours against the body. Today, buffalo heart is more likely to be seen as an oddity at a specialty butcher, the tradition forgotten or sanitized into restaurant novelty. But once, this sandwich told a story of strength, sacrifice, and survival, etched into every bite by hands hardened from the land. Peanut butter and pickle sandwiches were the lunchbox legends nobody admits to loving, but many still secretly miss. Born out of the Great Depression, this odd pairing was less about culinary boldness and more about making do with what was left in the pantry. Peanut butter was cheap, packed with protein, and shelf-stable. Pickles added crunch, tang, and just enough bite to wake up plain white bread. Somehow, the combination worked. The sweet creaminess of the peanut butter and the sharp, vinegary snap of a dill or bread and butter pickle created a balance that stayed with you, whether you liked it or not. These sandwiches were slipped into wax paper and handed off like rationed gold. Some kids traded them. Others guarded them with their lives. They were cheap. They were weird. And they were unforgettable. As the decades rolled on and lunch menus got glossier, peanut butter and pickle sandwiches faded from view. It might not win a gourmet prize today, but back then, it was a masterpiece made from struggle and stubbornness. The McDLT was a burger with a gimmick that actually worked. McDonald's served it in a special two-sided foam container. One half had the hot patty and bottom bun. The other half had lettuce, tomato, cheese, pickles, and the top bun. The point was to keep the hot side hot and the cool side cool. You had to assemble it yourself. It felt fancy. It felt fun. You would peel back that lid like you were opening something futuristic. A burger with a strategy. The lettuce was still crisp. The tomato was not wilted. The burger was steaming. Then you folded it together and took a bite. It was fast food pretending to be thoughtful. It only lasted a few years in the 1980s before disappearing, partly because the packaging was not great for the environment. But for a while, dads on their lunch breaks or families in the station wagon would crack open that container and feel like they were part of the future, not just a burger, an experience in two halves coming together in one bite. Peanut butter and marshmallow sandwiches were sticky, chewy, and completely chaotic in the best way. Unlike the Fluffernutter, which used smooth marshmallow creme, this version went old school, layering whole marshmallows right onto the peanut butter. The result was messier, thicker, and somehow more exciting. As you bit down, the marshmallows gave a stretch, and the peanut butter clung to everything: your teeth, the roof of your mouth, your fingers. It was the kind of sandwich that slowed you down, made you chew carefully, and left sweet residue in the corners of your smile. Some kids toasted it, watching the marshmallows melt into gooey bliss. Others just packed it cold and let the sandwich warm up on its own in their backpack by noon. Either way, it was dessert disguised as lunch, and it was glorious. You rarely saw it outside of grade school, but back then, it was a lunchbox secret weapon. No meat, no greens, no apologies, just joy between two slices of bread. The pimento cheese sandwich is a Southern tradition that spread like wildfire through cafeterias, picnics, and family reunions. The filling, a creamy, tangy blend of shredded cheese, mayonnaise, and diced pimentos, was made by the bowlful and kept in the fridge for whenever company came over. On soft white bread, it was the perfect blend of smooth and savory, with a little kick if you added pepper or hot sauce. Some versions came grilled, others were left cold, served with chips or sweet tea on the side. At its heart, it was an inexpensive way to feel fancy. Somewhere between a spread and a dip, it clung to its bread like glue, and nobody minded. For many, it tastes like church potlucks, backyard folding tables, and long afternoons under the fan. In certain households, it wasn't just a sandwich, it was a rite of passage, handed down in recipes scribbled on index cards with mayonnaise stains. You don't just eat a pimento cheese sandwich, you remember it. Chicken salad sandwiches were the quiet heroes of the lunchroom, the kind of sandwich that looked unassuming but delivered comfort in every bite. They started with leftover chicken, chopped fine or shredded, then folded into mayonnaise with bits of celery, sometimes a hint of onion, maybe a touch of mustard or dill. It all depended on who made it. Every family had their version. Some were creamy, some were chunky, some were elegant enough for tea parties and school lunch alike. Slapped between slices of white wheat or a buttered roll, chicken salad was never flashy, but it never disappointed. It felt like home, like Sundays turned into Mondays. It was cold, clean, and quietly satisfying. Kids who got a chicken salad sandwich in their lunchbox were either praised or pitied, depending on who you asked, but they always remembered it. Today, chicken salad has migrated to cafe menus and plastic deli containers, far from its humble homemade origins. Wild rice cake sandwiches with duck were sticky, rich, and deeply satisfying. Meals built near lakes, cooked over fire, and eaten with reverence. The rice was hand-harvested by canoe, soaked and shaped into firm patties, then griddled until crisp on the outside and chewy inside. Duck meat, usually smoked or slow-roasted, went between them. No sauce needed. The fat from the duck seeped into the rice, making each bite earthy, oily, and full of depth. These were celebration foods and everyday lunches rolled into one. The sandwich was portable, delicious, and deeply tied to the rhythms of water and migration. Wild rice still exists, but much of it is cultivated and stripped of its ritual. Duck is a delicacy now, not a staple. Together, they were once food and identity. We have kept the ingredients, but not the reason. Can you taste the difference when you do not know why it mattered? Smoked trout cornbread sandwiches were the northern traveler's treasure. Smoked flaked fish folded into thick slices of cornmeal bread packed tight for the road. It was not fancy, but it was powerful. Tribes along cold lakes and mountain rivers smoked their fish until it could last for weeks, then sandwiched it between pan-fried or stone-baked cornbread slabs. The result was portable, rich in protein, and layered with smoke and earth. A bite of this and you got the forest, the stream, and the campfire in one go. The sandwich was eaten on horseback, in canoes, or tucked in bark pouches during hunting treks. The trout, pink and oily, often mixed with herbs or wild onions. The cornbread was dense and hearty, able to hold its shape for days without crumbling. Today, these sandwiches are nearly extinct, replaced by crackers and canned spreads that barely hint at what used to be. The trout is still there, and so is the cornmeal, but the memory of pressing them together in survival and ceremony has faded. What was once instinctual is now sold separately at specialty food stores. Do we even know what we lost when the smoke stopped rising from those riverside camps? Cheese and apple sandwiches were the bite you never knew you needed. Sweet, sharp, and surprisingly grown up for something packed in a kid's lunchbox. Thin slices of crisp apple, usually red or golden, laid against salty cheddar cheese and pressed between soft bread, created a mix of flavor that hit every corner of the tongue. The crunch of the apple, the tang of the cheese, it all worked. There was something about that pairing, fruit and dairy, sweet and savory, that felt more like a farmer's market find than a cafeteria mainstay. But for many kids, especially those with creative parents or fond memories of fall, it was a staple. Sometimes it showed up on wheat bread, sometimes toasted. Occasionally even wrapped in foil with a note that said, "Eat me cold, it's better that way." It was not a flashy sandwich. No bright colors or sauces. Just good ingredients and smart contrast. Over time, it faded into the background as processed snacks took over, but that apple and cheese combo still feels like one of those rare lunchbox moments when everything just made sense. The cheese and pickle sandwich is one of those odd combinations that divides people at the very first bite. On one side of the bread, you've got sharp cheddar or American cheese. On the other, sliced dill pickles or even sweet bread and butter chips. It's a collision of creamy and tangy, savory and sour. Some folks butter the bread, some toast it, others eat it plain and cold. But the core idea remains the same. It's a sandwich that feels retro in the best way, like something you'd find packed in wax paper alongside a thermos of milk. It's humble but bold, weird but strangely addictive. Born from the era of rationing and refrigerator scrounging, it was perfect for meatless lunches or quick snacks when the deli drawer was bare, and somehow it always worked, especially if the cheese was sharp enough to bite back. Today, it lives on in lunchboxes, late-night cravings, and memories of brown bag field trips. It might not be everyone's favorite, but for those who get it, there's nothing else quite like it. Fried Bologna sandwiches were the working-class answer to gourmet, cheap, greasy, and absolutely perfect. A slice of Bologna slapped into a hot skillet until it curled at the edges, sometimes scored in the center to keep it flat, then dropped onto bread and finished with mustard, cheese, or whatever was around. It sizzled, it popped, it smelled like something you were not supposed to enjoy this much. And kids loved it. The edges got crisp, the center stayed soft. It was the kind of sandwich that left a grease spot on the bag and a smile on your face. Fried Bologna was not subtle, but it was reliable. It was warm and familiar. It made lunch feel like breakfast and dinner all at once. Parents made them quickly, often with one hand on the stove and the other helping with homework. It was the sandwich of multitaskers, of big families and thin budgets. And yet it tasted rich. It felt like a treat. Today you barely see them unless you go looking. But for those who grew up on it, fried Bologna was not just food. It was a full sensory memory wrapped in white bread. The Manwich sandwich is what happens when you need dinner in 10 minutes and your pantry has exactly 2 ingredients, a can of Manwich sauce and a pound of ground beef. It's the store-bought shortcut to a sloppy Joe, soaked in sweet, tangy tomato sauce and ready to heap on a hamburger bun. No chopping, no spice rack, no slow simmer, just brown the beef, pour the can, and you're done. In the 70s and 80s, it became a weeknight hero, advertised as, "A sandwich is a sandwich, but a manwich is a meal." It was a dinner-time fix for busy parents, latchkey kids, and anyone with a microwave and a spoon. The smell alone could draw kids out of their bedrooms like moths to a flame. Some added cheese, others pickles or onions, but most just kept it simple. It wasn't glamorous, but it got the job done. Today it still holds a place in the hearts of those who remember TV trays, linoleum kitchens, and the clink of a can opener on a Tuesday night. The cheese and pickle sandwich was for the kids who liked things sharp and sour, a little strange, and completely satisfying. A thick slice of cheddar, sometimes aged, layered with sweet pickles or tangy dill slices pressed between slices of sandwich bread, often white, occasionally wheat. It was a flavor bomb. Salty cheese met vinegary crunch, and somehow the combination made more sense than you would think. This was not a loud sandwich. It did not leak or crumble or stain your lunch bag. It sat there quietly, confident in its simplicity. You either craved it or could not stand it. But for those who loved it, it was perfect. It was the kind of sandwich you could eat cold, no heating or fuss required. It stayed intact. It delivered every time. Over the years, cheese and pickle became more of a British delicacy than an American staple. But there was a time when this sandwich showed up in lunchboxes across the country. Today, it is rarely seen in school cafeterias. The peanut butter and banana sandwich was sticky, sweet, and oddly sacred, especially if you grew up with a radio playing Elvis in the background. Soft white bread cradled ripe banana slices layered atop thick peanut butter, creating a sandwich that was pure indulgence and pure nostalgia all at once. It was comfort food at its simplest. No baking, no slicing, just a knife, a spoon, and one slightly bruised banana. Kids loved it. Parents trusted it. Lunchboxes welcomed it. Every bite was creamy, soft, and just a little bit messy. Sometimes it got mashed during the morning bus ride, but that only made it better, denser, more unified, like the ingredients had been given time to fall in love. Elvis Presley may have added bacon to his, but most kids were happy with just the basics. Over the years, the peanut butter and banana sandwich faded from lunch menus, traded out for wraps and granola bars. But it never really disappeared. Last but certainly not least, we have the Bologna sandwich. This one's still popular and never really vanished from Grandma's lunch table. Bologna, or bologna, originally hails from Bologna, Italy, where a similar sausage called mortadella is made. Of course, America has its own simplified version. A classic Bologna sandwich usually included slices of bologna, white bread, and a slather of mustard or mayonnaise. But some of our grandmas added cheese or pickles for some extra flavor. This sandwich became a lunchbox favorite in the mid-20th century, particularly during the 1950s and 1960s, since it was light on the pockets. In American slang, it's called the bologna sandwich, and the word means something nonsensical or silly, which refers to the inexpensive and playful nature of the sandwich. This one was so famous that country singer Jimmy Dean even wrote a song about it called Bologna. Our grandmas loved the song as much as they loved whipping this one up for us. So, did any of these classic grandma sandwiches stir up tasty memories? If so, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and let's keep those memories alive. The Muffaletta was not born in the average working man's kitchen, but it made its way there. Originating in New Orleans, it was a dense, round loaf stuffed with layers of salami, ham, mortadella, mozzarella, and provolone. The real magic came from the olive salad, chopped green and black olives, pickled vegetables, garlic, and oil, soaked into the bread like marinade. It was pressed, it was loud, it was messy, but it traveled well. That made it perfect for job sites, road crews, and long-haul truckers. You wrapped a wedge in foil, and it was still good hours later. The flavors deepened. The oil soaked in. You needed 2 hands to hold it, and at least 10 napkins. It was not dainty, but it was built to last. For men who worked through lunch or ate from the front seat, it was a solid, no-nonsense meal. A sandwich with weight. A sandwich with roots. It was not just New Orleans flair. It was lunch with attitude. When money was tight, creativity in the kitchen was essential, and the cabbage and mustard sandwich was a perfect example of making the most out of minimal ingredients. Boiled cabbage, often considered a humble vegetable, was paired with a dollop of yellow mustard, creating a simple yet satisfying filling between 2 slices of white bread. The cabbage provided a soft, mild base, while the mustard added a tangy kick that brought everything together. It wasn't the most exciting sandwich, but it served a purpose. It stretched pennies while still providing enough sustenance to get through the day. This sandwich became a staple for many who needed something filling, affordable, and easy to prepare. While it may have been basic, it was all about keeping things regular and using what you had available. The simplicity of this meal made it a go-to for families during tough times. And though the combination of cabbage and mustard may seem unusual, it was a practical meal when other options were limited. But if you think this sandwich is a little too simple, wait until you hear about the next one, which brings a bit of sweetness to the table. Ash cakes stuffed with smoked rabbit were the kind of food you didn't find in markets. You had to earn them. Made by burying cornmeal dough directly into hot ashes beneath a fire, The outer layer blackened and crisped while the inside steamed to tender perfection. Once cooled, the cakes were split open and stuffed with shredded smoked rabbit, seasoned lightly with wild herbs or nothing at all. This was real survival fare, prepared deep in the woods or beside a smoldering hearth. The smoky flavors from both cake and meat melted together, making the whole thing taste like it had lived beside the fire for days. You could eat it hot, or wrap it in cloth and take it out again days later. There were no condiments, no napkins, no fancy names, just hunger and ingenuity. Some tribes even used clay to shield the dough from burning, peeling it off once baked. Today, ash cakes survive mostly as a footnote in cookbooks, and smoked rabbit is a rarity outside of specialty game markets. But once, these sandwiches were warm, smoky lifelines through long, lean winters. Tell us which forgotten sandwich you survived, hit like and subscribe for more strange bites from the past.